All right, so in this particular demonstration, we're going to be looking over the exercise for final Project 3 submission, output files and formats. This will be a demonstration broken down into several videos. And so we'll start off by looking over final inspection of the project. So reviewing what we've created in the design, making sure everything is up to spec, and there's no stray materials in the scene or whatever. So we'll go ahead and start with that. Now I'm going to get started off and open up my file. So go back to File, Open. And again, when you're working on a file that leverages a lot of megabytes or memory or RAM, I highly recommend that you work from the desktop. Do not work from your little tiny thumb drives. If you're working from a nice portable hard drive that leverages like a Thunderbolt connection, then you're safe as far as a portable drive connection with your file. But if you're just working from a little thumb drive, I highly recommend you copy your project to the desktop to work with. It'll go much faster, much smoother in terms of editing. And I've got mine on my desktop here, so I'm just going to go into it. All right. So, brief recap. Last time we left off with adding 3D lights to our scene and manipulating where they were located, adjusting their attributes. We also talked a little bit about playing with the 3D camera in the scene and how to understand how the Blender environment is seen through a camera for rendering still files. We also talked about how to color a model by adding materials, and also how to add texture to a model surface. So we talked a little bit about how to apply that and different methods you could use for that. So with this particular demonstration, we're going to look at sort of a final inspection of our entire scene. And this is assuming that you are done with your model at this stage in the process. So again, take notes on this. Feel free to practice along. Whatever suits, again, your way of keeping up with the material. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our models are positioned where we want them in the scene by checking with the quad view on. Now, this is important when you do this stage. Now, I have my quad view up. I'm going to actually switch out of kind of material shader to wireframe shading preview on screen. So I'm just going to go to that little sphere down in my 3D menu bar, and I'm going to switch it to wireframe. You might have yours set to solid, which is the white sphere, or material, which is the orange sphere. But I'm going to switch it to wire. And when I bring up wireframe view, this is what it looks like. Everything's broken down into its polygon bone structure. And as I'm viewing my environment this way, it actually allows me to see the 3D grid floor and where my stuff is located. And for all intensive purposes, your model's location at this time and the cyclorama and any lighting all should be closely hovering around the intersection of the different axis lines, especially in the top view. So start there and look at your model and see if your actual character is located at the center or intersection of the green and red line inside the top view. If it is not, you need to move it around and get it over that marker. That represents the origin point inside of Blender 3D Space. That particular location is used when you export a model out and import it into another application. So if it's not there, it will be distanced from it accordingly in another application. So I'm making sure my model's located there on the top view. If I look in my right or my front or right view, my model should be positioned and centered over the vertical blue line in both of those views appropriately. Again, if you need to change it or move it around, just make sure that you use either your on-screen widget in either of those views to drag it and move it. You can also use G, the shortcut on your keyboard, with wherever your mouse is located to move it on a 2D axis in that particular window. But you want it centered at this point. And again, your model should appear on top of your cyclorama. It shouldn't be behind it. It shouldn't be off of it, somewhere out in the distance out here. It should be over it. So please make sure that it's located on top of the cyclorama, standing on the base of it. All right? So once we've kind of got things located and positioned, we're going to move over to the outliner panel over in the upper right. And in the outliner panel, some of the things that we want to look for is we're going to look through this list of objects and things that we have listed here. And you want to make sure to delete and remove all unused 3D assets, okay? So if you have any excess shapes floating inside of your outliner panel that you are not using, maybe you turn them off on purpose, like with the little eyeball tool, and you know you don't want to use them anymore, please get rid of them. You do not want them to mess around with the final render of your image or scene. So please make sure to remove them. They will show up later if you're not careful, especially during export. Even if you turn off the eyeball icon, when you export a model, it reads everything in the scene and sends it all out together in physical form. So if you have hidden stuff, delete it. A good thing to know is that, to go with that, is to make sure there are no stray models in your scene. And so if you find out that you're clicking through this list and just kind of highlighting different items, if they are not appearing over your cyclorama area where you're designing, then they're probably not a part of your scene anymore. Like I've had students do this where they have an element that they added and somehow it got added and it's floating way out here in space. You should not keep that item anymore. Delete it, select it, hit the X key, and remove it from your scene permanently. That will jack up the export and mess it up. So please make sure to delete any unused elements out of your scene, okay? Whether they are present over the top of your cyclorama or on your model when you don't want them anymore, or they're floating around somewhere in 3D space, get rid of them. Select them, hit delete, or hit X to delete them. Another reason that's important is when you import it into Augment. Augment will center your entire model based on a general center point for all items in the scene. So if you have items that are all kind of clustered way outside of the scene, it's going to put the kind of this center widget right in the middle of all of them to understand where to position the model in Augment space. And that can actually be very inaccurate or damaging to being able to see your file on critique day. So please, it's paramount that you get rid of excess junk out of your design space. For anything that you do want to keep in your scene, make sure those 3D assets are fully turned on with the eyeball and the camera icon in your outliner panel. Make sure that they're not turned off by accident with either of those two features. That way that they are actually going to be active and rendered in the final output of your image. So make sure they're on. Make sure you've got an eyeball on if it's supposed to be turned on. Make sure you've got a camera turned on because the camera will dictate whether or not it will render that object in the still image render scene that we'll make in a little bit. The last thing to check is just to preview your model and make sure that textures and materials are showing properly on your object before you go into the whole export matter. So I'm going to switch out of wireframe view and go to material real quick. And you want to double check to make sure that your model actually has like the texture attached to it that you have applied to it, or the color or any other color material attributes that you're supposed to be visible on your object. Please double check it. Another thing to do is to check those things out. I recommend doing without the quad view on for a minute. Is just to double check the render preview. So switching from like material shader to rendered. Turn that on and let it render your scene. And just make sure that it's showing your texture visible on top of your model at that time, or color on top of your respective models and forms. If it's not, then it means that your texture or color was not properly added to your model, and you may have to go back and redo that. You may have to go back and delete materials from the material property panel over on the right and start fresh and re-add them to your objects. But please double check those to make sure that they are showing if you go under rendered preview. If they don't see them there, you're not going to see them on export. All right. Last things I might look at, like just at this stage, that you may want to look at are things like just kind of check your lighting. Is your model well lit? Is kind of a basic factor here to kind of see how that's interacting with your scene. With the rendered preview on, does it look like it's rendering the preview of the model accurately? Is it too bright or too dark in places? But double check that stuff while you're here to make sure everything looks okay. And that's pretty much all that we check on the front end of looking over the inspection of our model and our piece. And so there's not really much more we need to do past that stage. Again, at that point, you save your work if you've made any corrections to keep it secure. Now I'm going to go ahead and we'll move into the next section here with a separate demonstration video. So I'm going to stop this one. And we're going to pick up on rendering the multiple views of your sculpture. So we're going to look at making still image renders.